Hello and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the 2021 horror sequel and indeed part prequel, Fear Street Part 3, 1666, as directed once again by Leigh, Janiak, and as based on the book series of the same name by R.L. Stine. So this movie actually forms part of a trilogy, with each movie, parts 1, 2 and 3, being originally shot back to back and then released literally weeks apart, this being the third, delving directly into the origin of the ancient witch's curse bestowed upon a small community which had kind of sculpted the events of the first two movies. Each movie is set in a different time period, examining the tensions, rivalry and prejudice between the two neighbouring towns, Sunnyvale and Shadyside, against the kind of this backdrop of the curse, which only serves to kind of fuel tensions further. The first took us back to 1994, where we met a group of teens from Shadyside who inadvertently come across the curse and awaken a murderously unstoppable force. The second was set in 1978, where we followed a group of not-so-happy campers at Camp Nightwing, where a serial killer threatens to put a dampener on the summer festivities. So then this movie, the third in the series, is a movie of two halves, shall we say. The first takes us all the way back to 1666 to witness the origin of this witch's curse, before kind of being whisked back to 1994 for the ultimate showdown against the dark forces holding Shadyside within its claws. Moving straight on from the events at the end of the second movie, we now once again follow Dina Johnson, as played by Kiana Madeira, as she looks to kind of put an end to the Shadyside curse and save her now possessed girlfriend from the clutches of evil. This time being transported to view the events that transpired when the curse was born, through the eyes of the witch herself, Sarah Fear. Living in a small settlement called Union, which sits on the land where Shadyside and Sunnyvale would be born, we bear witness to the prejudice, the ignorance and the horror that unfolded all of those years ago, to turn Sarah's life into the macabre legacy she later becomes infamous for, and to kind of spark the curse which would blight Shadyside for generations to come. Then, armed with that knowledge and foresight to be able to end the curse for good, we are transported back to 1994 for one final showdown with the forces of evil surrounding Shadyside, in an all-or-nothing mission, totally going all-out Scooby-Doo style, that literally is a matter of life and death for those involved. So I must say, I have thoroughly enjoyed this entire series of films. I love the idea, the premise, and the world building that we've had here, and indeed the overall story that unfolded. Now, do I think there was enough of the story to kind of span 3 films? Well, no. You kind of could have done this. Most of what occurred could have been kind of condensed into one, to be honest. There wasn't anything kind of totally revelationary that this series has done. What it has been is just entertaining. That's what it set out to do. It hasn't broken any new ground. It's just been an absolute thrill ride. But, and it's a big but, most other franchises drag out their ideas too, right? With very little to show for it. This one remained true to its original ideals, and because of the kind of extra time given to the story, this allowed much more sincere and meaningful character development, which I have to say, along with the direction, was kind of the showcase of this series, and something you don't often get in the horror genre, It has definitely been a consistent trilogy in terms both of quality and its delivery, yet giving us in essence 3 films with completely different energy, different atmospheres, yet relating to this kind of this same continuity throughout an intertwined story. That whilst by kind of being padded for what it was, I'm not going to lie, it was never really felt that way, and yielded a fantastic idea that give, plenty of thrills and spills along the way. I love the fact that each movie had a different theme, a different style, and I think that really spoke to the creativity and the range of the direction and all of those involved. Now, I was quite interested to see how the third one developed specifically, because after watching the first 2 movies, if you've seen those reviews, then you kind of get the idea, given the fact that they had been set very specifically in areas with a very strong connection to horror in their own way, and each indeed played on a number of references to the genre, which gave them a very distinct energy and this kind of punchy vibe, especially with the significant use of kind of music, from each of the respective decades. So, of course, being set in 1666, this kind of meant that this one was going to have to take a bit of a different tact. And indeed, for the first half of the movie, it did. It was more of a very serious affair, very melancholy, and indeed relied heavily on its characters, even more so than the other entries, and indeed made excellent use of the score. There was obviously no music, 1666, I'm wondering what would have been in the top 10 back then, but, you know, this time we had the score, which really did kind of shine through. Again, penned by Marco Beltrami, which kind of added a bit of consistency through the three films, and Anna Drubrich, which became much more of a poignant and prominent entry in delivering the required atmosphere for this part of the movie. But it was a powerful half, cutting deep and being fed kind of into this paranoia and suspicion and outright ignorance of the time in which it was kind of being set, you know, bringing a completely different aesthetic and absolute passion into the mix. It was certainly a tantalising start which kind of fed into our own paranoia and assumptions about the events that had come to pass. The horror, it was a bit more subdued as well at that point, but present, but kind of erring more on the side of a period drama kind of thing. It was certainly more paganistic, and there was certainly a distinct terror present, but in a more kind of tragic and personal way. But what such a terrific setup for the second half, you know, which ramped everything back up tenfold. But perhaps in its own kind of way, erring on the side of an action movie. But given the journey that we'd kind of been with these characters, you know, I didn't kind of mind the approach. It was an interesting kind of way to round things off. It was indeed more than a satisfying and very kind of fitting conclusion to this trilogy, I thought. It felt like most of the important questions had been tied up and, you know, very intensely presented and a very well-balanced finale. Using the cast from the first two movies, I thought, was an interesting choice to start with. It was a little confusing at first, as it wasn't kind of clear that this was a flashback and not kind of a body swap, which I thought it kind of was. So admittedly, that did take a little bit of time to kind of get used to, but there were some kind of subtle additions and traits which did play out, which kind of give kind of similarities between the characters played in 1666 and their 1978 and 1994 counterparts, which kind of give, I thought, a further level of connectivity and kind of counterbalance to the different styles used, and perhaps a rationale for why those particular characters in the end, perhaps. In the end, I think either way, Madeira did an absolutely fantastic job in really again showing us again this terror on a very personal level against what is, to start with, a very heartfelt and poignant story with a very strong kind of emotional core. The pain and the anguish, it feels real, connected and very relevant. By the end, everything comes around full circle, and which was an absolute thrill ride as we, you know, intensify the inevitable showdown, which does kind of offer a very tangible conclusion and a means to an end to kind of closing off many of the loops which had kind of formed in our minds as the series had progressed. It completely, you know, shifts gear once again in the second half, bringing back much of that kind of 90s neon vibrancy, very distinctly different, and kind of play on those other horror references. It brings them straight back into the fold, back into focus, which is just a fantastic buzz, absolutely fantastic buzz. I'm still buzzing after watching these films now, following a more kind of moderate and kind of melancholy affair of the first half. A total kind of and distinct contrast. Yeah, that's the only way to kind of say it. It's a film of two very sharp, contrasting halves. Overall, once again, this was a very satisfying conclusion to what was a brilliantly choreographed trilogy of movies. I absolutely love the concept they adopted for each of the three installments, and although, yes, it was a bit serialised, I think there was enough in each that proved the series could more than step out on its own. And each of the three movies had a completely different flavour from the others, yet still with a very connected and familiar feel. Whilst not bringing as much horror, not even meta-references as its predecessors, this entry still brought a very intriguing story and some fantastic characters to life, proving and providing a brilliantly directed and moving end to the trilogy, and one which was still more than entertaining. Indeed, overall, it wasn't so much about the length of this story. You know, 3 movies in, It was more about bringing this universe and characters to life with this kind of distinct energy and love for the genre which shines through. And this kind of third entry accomplished this rounding out the trilogy of events in a very fitting and emotional manner, more than proving that the cast and characters could more than handle themselves throughout. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.